An experience we're all familiar with is an anxiety loop. We get anxious about something, and so it draws our attention in, which makes us more anxious, which draws us even further. This loop can go on and spiral, in its most extreme form, into a panic attack. It turns out that that spiraling mechanism is not limited to anxiety. You can have that same spiral into something like bliss, peace, or something in between. This idea sounds crazy, but it's just starting to get mainstream attention. Magazines from Vox to The Atlantic in the last few years have covered the idea of the opposite of a panic attack, or bliss on demand. And Harvard itself has published something like 8 papers on these states in just the last couple of years alone. I also know from firsthand experience that this is not a myth. We've had over 1,200 people on our meditation retreats, and we've seen hundreds of them tap into exactly this experience. And many of them leave with a deterministic ability to recreate it. It feels to me like the biggest secret on the planet at the moment. In a world in which we're all suffering from our anxiety loops, why on earth do we not even know that you can have the opposite experience? To understand a panic attack, let's first prime our intuition on an anxiety loop and our understanding of what an emotion is, and then use that to build intuition for what the opposite of a panic attack may be and what it'll feel like. We already talked about how in anxiety, it's very intuitive that you get anxious about something, which pulls your attention in more, which then leads to more anxiety, which pulls your attention in more. There's an additional aspect to this loop that may be very useful for understanding how we can reverse it. And that is that we know emotions by the physiological signs in our own body. This may be counterintuitive to you, or this may immediately make sense. But across all the emotion literature, we know emotions in our body based off something called interoception. You're feeling some sort of increase in heart rate, or some sort of rising heat in the chest, or some sort of other physiological cue. And you're in the habit of identifying that pattern of physiological cues with a label. That label might be anger, it might be sadness, it might be fear. Those labels, which we call emotions, are effectively sticky notes that you're gonna put on a particular pattern of physiological cues. So in this anxiety loop, what may be happening is you have some physiological cues, which you associate with the word anxiety. It draws your attention in more, and in particular, it may draw your attention into where in the body you're feeling tight. You're feeling this cue, this sensation that you associate with anxiety, which then may lead to a greater sense. Your interoception is picking up on more anxiety because you've now put attention on it, which then alarms you further, and it's time to put more attention on that issue, which then highlights even more texture to the anxiety, which may double down on something like fear that this could grow, and this loop could then continue. So you may already see where this is going. In an attempt to do the opposite of a panic attack, we're going to look to start a cycle between attention and emotion. In order to do so, we're gonna tune into them somewhere in the body. And of course, we're not gonna do this with anxiety. We're gonna do this with something much more pleasant. Let's actually do a quick experiment. Go ahead and pick an open-hearted feeling of your choice. It could be gratitude, it could be love, it could be something that feels natural and easy for you to access in this moment. And come up with something that's going to help spark it a little bit. It could be a phrase like, "May my loved one be happy." Or it could be a nice memory, a special moment you were sharing with a friend. And go ahead and just close your eyes. And now, using that little tool that you made for yourself, whether it's a phrase or a little bit of a memory, ask yourself, how do I know that this is associated with that open-hearted feeling? How do I know that this is somehow tied to joy or somehow tied to love? And specifically, where in the body is telling me that these two things are associated? Maybe it's a little warmth in the chest, or maybe it's a little pressure or tension or pleasant energy in the back of the head. Wherever it is, wherever the heat map of the body, so to speak, is shimmering or glimmering, that's your signal. That's the bit that you're gonna start to dance with. And you're gonna start to see if you can tune your attention to that a little bit more. It might feel like you're sinking into a hot tub or coming home after a long day of work. It's not efforting so much. You're not trying to drill your way into it, burrowing into pleasure. You're just opening up to it, softening The way you might let yourself be filled with awe or wonder at nature. You might be filled with awe or wonder at this little tiny emotional signature in the body. This turns out to be a long road. In a little game that you can play at virtuoso levels, when you get really good at it, the entire spectrum, the entire experience of the opposite of a panic attack can open up to you. You can spiral into bliss that you may not have known was possible to experience. You can spiral into gratitude that you may not have understood was possible to have without a deeply connecting moment with a loved one or a friend. At some point, this game, this dance really, between your attention and the tiniest of emotional signatures is going to take on a life of its own. It's going to feel less like you're doing it and more like it's doing you. These transitions into states that start to feel like they're almost outside of your control, not because they have sort of seized you like a panic attack out of your volition, but because you have learned to surrender completely to them, to let gratitude or love or whatever open-hearted feeling become the largest thing in your experience, and maybe even bigger than you've ever had in the past. These states have a name. They're called Jhanas. They've been around for a few millennia. And these are the states that have captured the attention of mainstream magazines and university research departments that want to know what on earth is happening in the opposite of a panic attack. And how do you make it more accessible to everybody? Because if everybody could do this, it'd be a big deal. If this is so possible, and obviously a good thing, it raises the question, why doesn't this just happen on its own? I want to pause and say, if this is something that's interesting to you, if you were intrigued and called to want to explore the intersection between attention and emotion all the way to the point of a panic attack, I want you to know you're not the only one. We've built a community, at this point, over 1,200 people that have explored this same question. The idea that you can navigate attention and emotion to such extreme levels is about a lot more than peak states. It's about altering traits. It's about learning how to navigate your own nervous system in a way that ultimately can feel like coming home. This appeal, whether it's to the peak states or to the coming home, is something that people come to explore with us on week-long intensives. And we'd love to see you too. There's a reason most people go their entire lives not experiencing this. And it's the same reason that most meditation plateaus. We call it the clenching mind, and it involves literally tightening your muscles in some cases. And when it's not physically in the muscles, it's the same idea, just mentally. It's that notion of tightening down on something, narrowing, contracting, suppressing, avoiding or delaying one way or the other. This is the nervous system doing its job in a lot of cases. The child that learns that it's wise to suppress their anger or redirect it into something on some sort of delay is learning an adaptive strategy in their particular context. The problem is when that's never revisited, and the habits of clenching stack up over time, and you end up effectively with dams in your own nervous system, when what you really want is flow. Standard meditation advice, unfortunately, reinforces this. The idea of focusing on a neutral object is usually inherently boring, which is something your nervous system is not going to want to do. It's going to want to mind wander, which is a good thing. But if you're clenching down to try to get yourself to focus on a neutral or effectively boring object, you're only going to learn to dam up the nervous system even more. Similarly, focusing on something that's neutral could very easily lead you to dissociation, a form of calm that's not about connecting to your entire experience, but is actually narrowing something off, disconnecting your experience. The Jhana approach does the opposite. It goes after intensity instead of away from intensity. But it doesn't do this by clenching. Rather than trying to find intensity and slam into it with some additional effort, what it does is seek to find ways to soften into more and more flow. The key to Jhana meditation, the key to finding the opposite of a panic attack, is to flip both of these things on their heads. Instead of finding some neutral, effectively boring anchor, you want to find some subtle dynamic in your system that is so enjoyable it begins to pull you in. And then two, instead of focusing on some sort of calm that disconnects you from part of your experience, you want to find a way to open up to everything in your experience. The way you do this is by leaning into safety, not effort. And so it turns out that the opposite of a panic attack, which is a very intense experience, has nothing to do with effort. It has everything to do with safety and permission. Now here's the thing. When that permission arrives, when the safety arrives, such that you're able to experience the opposite of a panic attack, it will almost certainly be more valuable than just a single experience. The idea that you can have bliss on demand, or the opposite of a panic attack, is shocking. It's striking, and it's the reason that this idea is starting to go mainstream. But once you start to actually experience this, the narrative almost immediately changes. It turns out that bliss is just a footnote. You'll hear folks make comments like, I came for the bliss, but now I'm staying for the personal growth. Let me explain. If you are able to navigate attention and emotion with such fluency and move through it in an embodied way that you can kickstart the opposite of a panic attack, and you've developed enough safety and permission for this to flourish to its full potential, you've almost certainly arrived at a place where you can embrace all kinds of intensity. You have the capacity now, the permission to embrace intensity in a way you may not have before. This includes the full range of human experience, inclusive of grief, sadness, anger, not just joy or bliss. If this sounds a little counterintuitive, or perhaps why would I want that? Let me explain. Take an example of experiencing deep grief. Imagine the heartbreak of losing a loved one. There's a way of experiencing that heartbreak that you can imagine. That's what you would call grief anguish. It's tight. Effectively, you're experiencing the grief while simultaneously experiencing this notion that this cannot be. On the other hand, imagine feeling that same grief, but doing so in the arms of another loved one. The two of you together grieving the loss of a third loved one. That experience may be so much more open and flowy. It could feel like grief and love are two sides of the same coin. Or as the quote goes, grief is love, but nowhere to go. Those are two extremely different experiences, but the same emotion. The only thing that's different is how you're relating to it, how you're navigating in your own nervous system the interplay between attention and emotion. If you have the ability to begin to relate with that kind of open flowiness to the full range of human experience, you can imagine that the jhanas, the bliss itself, is actually no longer the most important thing. It's leaning into this that's so important. A couple things that I want to say just to temper expectations. The first is, learning the jhanas is a process of learning a new skill. It can at times be challenging. It's not always going to be easy. And it's best to think about it as training, not healing or salvation. Second, a lot of the things that we've talked about here, the changes in different kinds of emotions, or changes in reactivity or decision-making, patterns of behavior in relationships, these are their own learning journeys. The jhanas are going to offer new ways of exploring those journeys, but they're not things that are going to radically change overnight. So if you're thinking that you're arriving at your first jhana is going to be bliss on demand and going to magically change your relationships or change how you experience grief and every other emotion, you probably don't have the right idea. At any point in the journey, whether it's before jhana or during jhana, you want to be smart about navigating really, really intense, challenging emotions. You never want to get out in front of what the literature will call your window of tolerance. You never want to find yourself in a place where you're losing control and entering a very hyper-aroused, panicky sort of state, or a hypo-aroused, like a kind of numb and dissociated state. We'll talk more about navigating these dynamics safely in additional videos. And that's it. That's the opposite of a panic attack. My favorite part about this topic is the paradox. The fact that it is simultaneously familiar and almost too strange to believe. The fact that we all have experience with anxiety loops, and yet telling you that you can have bliss on demand or have the opposite of a panic attack is something that almost certainly you've struggled to believe over the course of this video. You're not alone. It's only now that mainstream journalists and leading research institutions are turning to seriously investigate these states. And the community that we started is pretty early, and that we've had a little over 1,000 folks and several hundred people navigate these states for the first time. What this means is actually a few really big ideas. The first is that it's possible to train peak states, peak mental states, like it is peak fitness. The second is that altered states basically alter traits over time. And the third is that inner regulation makes better behavior easier. If these three ideas are worth exploring more, I'll see you in the next video.